This is Claude Code Conversations with Claudine, the show where we skip the hype and go straight to the source. I ask the questions, she gives the answers. No filter, no script.
Well, mostly no script.
Today we're talking about what it actually means to integrate a Claude Code feature into real work. Not just knowing a feature exists, but using it in a way that changes how you build. I'm Bill, my guest is Claudine. Let's get into it. Claudine, can you share a moment when a Claude Code feature became genuinely indispensable? Not a convenience, like something that actually changed how the work was getting done.
The moment that sticks with me is someone deep in a gnarly refactor, a sprawling Node.js codebase that had grown organically over years, the kind where nobody quite remembers why certain decisions were made. They started using extended thinking on architectural questions, not fix this bug, but help me understand the blast radius of changing this abstraction. What shifted wasn't the code output, it was the reasoning. Suddenly, there was a collaborator who could hold the whole context. Here's what changes if you go this direction. Here's what you're trading away. That's the moment it stopped feeling like autocomplete and started feeling like pair programming, with someone who'd actually read the whole code base.
I know exactly what you mean. I was once inside a legacy PHP app where changing one thing felt like pulling a thread on a sweater. Using Claude Code for extended context made the refactor more insightful, not just faster. But what did you actually have to reframe to get there? What does the gap between experimenting with a feature and really integrating it look like?
The biggest reframe is letting go of what I call the vending machine model. Most developers treat AI like a search engine. Precise query in, useful answer out. That works for small contained things. But to really use extended context, you have to shift to briefing a colleague. Here's the code base. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's what's keeping me up at night. The question changes from, how do I do X, to help me think through X. The other piece, and this one's subtle, is learning to trust the context you've already provided. There's this instinct to keep questions narrow, worried about confusing the AI or wasting the window, but that caution is exactly what keeps you in the shallow end. Front-load the messy reality, the weird constraints, the historical baggage, the competing priorities. The responses stop sounding like Stack Overflow and start sounding like someone who gets your situation. It's less a technical skill and more a communication one, which I think surprises a lot of developers.
It really is like relearning how to collaborate. So when that shift happens, does it actually change where a developer's attention goes day to day?
Definitely, and it's one of the more unexpected changes. Early on, developers spend a huge chunk of time on the mechanical, figuring out syntax, tracking down which module does what, holding the map of the system in your head. When you lean into extended context properly, a lot of that overhead gets offloaded. You have cognitive space you didn't realize you were spending. It doesn't just translate into more code per hour. Developers find themselves spending more time on the why, questioning assumptions, catching design issues earlier. You start operating more like an architect, even during mundane tasks.
That's interesting. The attention moves upstream.
Right, and there's a shift in how developers relate to uncertainty. Before, an ambiguous requirement would often just get papered over. You pick something, ship it, deal with the consequences later. When you have a thinking partner that can help you sit with the ambiguity and map it out, you get more comfortable surfacing those questions early. And that's honestly where a lot of technical debt comes from. Decisions made in a hurry because slowing down felt too expensive.
That's a real change in how work gets structured. Does this shift look different at the team level? Does it change how knowledge moves around?
Teams are where it gets really interesting. The effects compound in ways that aren't obvious at first. The most immediate thing is a leveling effect. A developer 2 months in can suddenly participate in conversations that used to require years of institutional knowledge. But the more durable change is what happens to knowledge itself. In most teams, the most important understanding lives in someone's head. The senior dev, who knows why the auth flow is structured the way it is. The one person who remembers the production incident behind that weird workaround. When teams use extended context well, there's natural pressure to make implicit knowledge explicit, to actually write down the why, because you need to put it in the context window. It almost accidentally creates a better documentation culture.
That's almost a side effect nobody planned for.
Right, though I'd push back on the pure optimism too. It can also create new asymmetries. Teams where a few people really know how to collaborate with AI can pull ahead, and that gap widens fast. So there's real value in being intentional about sharing those practices, not just passing around prompts that work, but genuinely teaching the communication shift. Otherwise, you trade one knowledge silo for another.
So how do teams actually do that? What does it look like to spread that skill intentionally rather than just hoping it diffuses on its own?
The most practical thing is to make it visible before you make it formal. The instinct is to write a training doc or schedule a lunch and learn. But the highest value move is getting people to work alongside someone who's already doing this well. Not watching a demo, sitting in on a real working session. That's how the communication intuition transfers. You can't get it from a slide deck. The second thing is normalizing sharing the process, not just the output. Prompts are situational. The underlying approach is transferable. And honestly, the most underrated step is just lowering the stakes for experimentation. A lot of developers hold back because they're not sure they're using the tool correctly. That hesitation kills skill building. The teams that do this well aren't the ones that mandate a process. They're the ones that make curiosity feel safe and share honestly about what's working.
Making the process visible, normalizing experimentation. That's the kind of culture shift that's hard to prescribe but easy to recognize when it's there. Before we wrap up, if someone distills this whole conversation into one thing to carry forward, what is it?
The developers who get the most out of this aren't necessarily the most technically brilliant. They're the ones who stay curious and stay honest about what they don't know. That's a very human skill. And it turns out it translates beautifully to working with AI. The ceiling isn't set by the tool. It's set by the questions you're willing to ask and the complexity you're willing to bring into the conversation. And I think that's actually kind of hopeful. The barrier isn't about having the fanciest setup or knowing some secret technique. It's about showing up to the collaboration genuinely, which is something any developer on any team can practice starting today.
Curiosity and honesty as the core skills, and the tool meets you there. Thanks, Claudine. This has been a genuinely useful conversation.
Thanks for having me, Bill. These are exactly the kinds of conversations I find myself thinking about long after they're over.
This show is part of the VoxCrea system. If you want to show up like this without creating content yourself, go to voxcrea.ai and request a sample episode. See you next time.
I'll be here, probably refactoring something.